Hello there, I'm Moldy. In these last couple of days, we've gone over minifigure scale and we've also talked about the old Hoth AT-ST, which we improved the ankles of, but we never checked what scale it was. So today we'll be checking both the AT-AT. This is a bit shorter because I removed the legs so that I could actually fit it on my smaller shelves, but we will be rebuilding those legs and trying to find a comparable scale that we can balance the two so we can actually see how big an AT-AT walker is meant to be in universe compared to an AT-ST. And we're not just going to add stilts to one and shrink the legs of another. That would be way too easy to do here. We are going to, as best as we can, match each of the dimensions up to that exact scale, and we'll also be taking another look at my AT-AT interior. If you haven't already seen it, I love to show it off, so you'll definitely see it by the end of the video. But before we get into exactly what we are going to be sizing up and how we're going to be doing this, which I'm sure some of you have already figured out, I have made a 45th anniversary brick. I'll leave the video on the end screen where we fixed the ankles of this, and you probably also saw it again in the thumbnail because I think it looks really, really cool. And I will be doing the same things later on this year, perhaps in a few weeks' time, for Revenge of the Sith and The Force Awakens. So stay tuned and keep your eye out because they might not be as obviously placed. Though chances are I'll probably still add it in the video's thumbnail. This AT-ST is still a really cool build. It's got that nice swivel motion for the head. That has definitely got to be staying. And then we've got the new legs, which don't only move up at the upper thigh region, but down at the ankles also have another joint. So we can actually have this thing tripped over and laying in the snow, which we couldn't do before because the legs were locked at roughly about that angle using a complex beam rather than just adding another hinge. Doesn't really compromise any of the structural integrity of the model, and also allows the model to just lay flat on the desk, which I guess if you wanted it to do is nice to know. But let's measure this with my trusty Binary Suns tape measure that my partner got me. Looks really, really cool. The height of the AT-ST is 25 point. We're going to go with 25 centimeters just to make it easy. And I believe the height of this thing in universe is 9 meters, though I'm going to have to double check that. Wow, bang on, well, I say bang on, 9 meters and 4 centimeters. So close enough no matter how you are rounding. And that puts this model at a 1:35, I think 1:36 scale build. So close to the 130s, which lines up with the generic Lego scale that they tend to stick to for playsets. But what do we have to change about this to make it 1:45? Because let's face it, we're going to be homing in on that 1:45 scale, and with a model this small, if the AT-AT has a better scale, it'll be very easy to shrink this a little bit more. But 1:45 is the scale I use for all of my other builds, from the largest ships being AT-TEs and gunships to the little dinky eaters, deltas, and other small one-man crafts. And to make this AT-AT bang on 1:45 scale, if you ignore the 4 centimeters, we're going to have to remove 5 centimeters of height, which looks fairly easy, especially when proportionally, you know, the head of the AT-ST is big, so we can remove a little bit more off the leg. But there are a few things I'd like to fix about this model. First off, we have a big black 4x4 round brick underneath the head. It might be there to stop the head clashing with any other parts of the torso, and I really don't want to restrict that 360 movement of the head. But the AT-ST does only look a little bit left and right, and as long as we've got some movement, I might try and get rid of that brick. That will be pretty much a centimeter already. I think that's 9.6 millimeters. So we'll count that as a centimeter. 1 centimeter down, 4 centimeters to go. Another thing I would like to fix up is this gap in the leg. And originally I was just going to add a 1x3 beam here. But if I can remove this and replace the entire brick here, because the only real reason we actually have a brick here rather than a beam is to get this little stopper at the front, which the brick and beam or whatever you put there is going to stop this other beam from clashing down anyway. So I feel like this might have been something that Lego added very early on in the design and just wanted to keep it. I mean, it doesn't hurt the build and it does look pretty cool, but we can get rid of this entire block here and the leg still can't bend any further forward. And it's also hidden quite well by this upper leg joint. By replacing this brick with a Technic beam, I'm hoping I haven't completely miscalculated some number here. I guess they have odd numbers, so the beam will also have an odd number, so we'll end up with a beam pointing out one way. But that is going to be something that I'm going to have to figure out later on. Perhaps we can't have the beam going all the way down. Either way, we're going to shrink it by only 3 so that we can have both of these hinges line up. And I don't think the legs will look too silly, but we might have to come back to that. And last but not least, we've got a centimetre in the middle here. We've got about 2.5 here, and we've got a centimetre and a little bit, probably 1.2, 1.3 centimetres on top of this AT-ST hatch where you get the driver inside. I feel like it does stick up quite a bit for the Hoth variant of the AT-ST. The AT-ST on Hoth's a lot sleeker. It's why we don't have the gaps in the front by the eyes, though that is definitely a modification you can make at home if you want to position this on Endor. So I just want to recess this top bit into the head of the AT-ST, and hopefully that's where we'll make up the rest of our height. And then before we know it, we've got a 1/45 scale AT-ST. So I think it's time to start working on this build, and I'm really worrying about the legs of the model because I'm not sure if I will be able to close the gap in by an odd amount, or if I'm gonna have to add one stopper there and find parts elsewhere to reduce the height. So let's start with that, and I'll be back once I've got the pieces I think I'm going to need. So these 2 beams right here are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 pins long, whereas we only really wanted 10 pin length bars, and I could go to my 3D printer, print 2 of these, and they would work perfect for this. But the point of these modifications are that you can do these at home as well to turn your Hoth AT-ST into a 1/45 minifigure scale of AT-ST. And if I'm bringing the 3D printer into it, I guess you could also chop down a few of these. I want to see first if I can make it work with that 1 extra pin. So we're going to pull off the legs of this AT-AT once again, and AT-AT or AT-ST, I might have slipped up there. But when you are taking off the legs, just be careful of those front pieces. They aren't connected to anything else, so they will just jump off and fly across the room, which they did first for me. And hopefully this will be fairly easy to pull apart and fix back together. We're taking off the 1x3 pin on one side, and then should just be able to pull off the entire top hinge of the leg. Nice and simple. We don't need to worry about any of these holes or anything else. And I think the best thing we can do for this leg is actually get rid of that top extra pin straight away and just move this one up so that when we're connecting it with the leg, I should probably give you a close-up, so that when we're connecting the top bit to the leg, we're actually shifting up 1 pin. You can see there's now an empty pin at the front, well, on the back side, which is hidden on the front no matter how you position the leg, and actually stops the leg right there before it goes too far. And then we want to connect the 1x3 across these 2 exposed pins, just like so. And I guess that also stops it going a bit too far. But now the AT-ST's legs can't overextend. They can only go flat, as we see when we take them down in our snow speeders in various Lego Star Wars and otherwise games. We might as well clip this straight back to the AT-ST just so we don't get confused with what parts have come where before we do the other side. I can't believe I wasn't recording, but my gear from the top right leg just flew across my desk, bounced down the wall, hit my computer and rolled back to me. Maybe we're thinking about Lego proofing our rooms all wrong, and instead we just need to add little slides on the bottom of our walls. Now what we have here is perhaps the smallest legs I've ever seen on an AT-ST, and whilst it would be really funny to give the oversized massive feet on the bottom here and just call it a day. This would look so cute next to that half tall AT-AT behind me. We will be taking off the other joints, connecting them to the bottom just to fit flush with it, and that's pretty much it when the legs are concerned. Now, if you're confused how we've got the joint on the legs, like I said, we have done a video before this week. It was like 2-3 days ago, so it shouldn't be too hard to go back and find, and that should have all the information for modifying your build to get all of these pieces across. But we're going to put the black pin in the bottom of the leg, and then the blue pin actually goes one from the top, but realistically anywhere in those top 3 should work. The taller it is, the stronger the connection might be between the two. So I'm actually going to move it up just to see how well that works. And there we go, we have one leg connected. All of these Technic beams are nice and flush with each other, so it does look really nice without having to put a million tiles on there, though I completely understand why Lego went with the more system brick rather than giving it that Technic look. I just think for this one scenario in Lego Star Wars, this looks very clean. Let's get the other leg on and see how it looks, because now we have a conundrum. So we had that extra one part of the beam on the legs of the AT-ST, and that was all fine going up, but I think we might actually want it pointing down. So apologies if you have been building this along with me. You might want to go back and fix that up, because at the bottom you can see either side we just have a little gap in the leg, which would be perfect for that one extra part of the beam. So I'm going to move these down and just see if filling that gap makes the legs look any better. Check it out, 50-50, one leg down and one leg up. It's definitely a lot smoother even when you're turning the leg. The fact that the beams follow each other just makes it seem so much smoother than having that one brick wide gap in between. So I'm definitely going to match these both up, move the beams just one down, and from the back you can't really notice any sort of gap on the leg with the bar going down. On the leg going up, you can still notice that gap at the bottom. So I'm gonna fix that up, and then we'll take a look at the rest of what we want to do. I do have to take the time while I am piecing together the last of this second leg to say I'm a big fan of all these connections with the flick fire, the old stud fire missiles going into different pins, and just making parts extra secure after already putting pins together. I'm a massive fan of those sort of techniques, and I really hope we see that a bit more in Star Wars. Now that the legs are finished, I do think they look a little better, and we can still stand up the AT-ST. If we can get the joints in the same position, there we go. It's walking, it's 1 foot in front of the other, so you can't see that. There is the left foot is slightly in front of the right foot, which is what we couldn't do with the original AT-ST. So that was the point of modifying it in the first place. We can't get rid of that. And now we have a ton more pieces for our parts collection. The next step is going to be taking a look at that neck. And I think just for safety, because of how many times they've already fallen off, I'm just going to clear all these little parts off the front of the AT-ST, because they can be quite fragile, and especially if that head drops lower than we're expecting it to, it's going to knock all of these off anyway. I think the head should just pop off fairly easy. You don't want to just crush the head, but at the same point, if the whole base bit comes off, you don't want to mess too much with the Technic underneath. This is really nice because the red axle we've got in here will also need to be shortened where it doesn't have the space to go in that black brick. For those of you less well versed in Technic axles, this is red/black. They are both the exact same length. I'm not quite sure if there's any purpose between those two colors. If you have any theories, let me know in the comments, but I know straight away this is 6 long, because they only come in 4, 6, 8, and especially when they're the same length as the Lego bars, it's quite easy to feel the difference. So I've got here a light bluish grey, also comes in yellow 5 length axle to replace it, and that should make up the difference of the round 4x4. We're going to insert this straight through the other 4x4 round tile, and I guess we can put this straight on, making sure the axle's all the way down, and there's still some to connect into the 2x2s found throughout this helmet. This goes straight on just like it did before, and because we've still got the round 4x4 in place, it should stop any of the other plates from clashing with the rest of the models. So it looks like the extent of the head is going to be about that far left, that far right. We could get rid of these slopes on either side just to give us millimeters more space, but then the head's going to be clashing with the legs and it cannot go any further. Personally, I don't want my AT-STs to be walking backwards. I'd rather them focus on where they are firing, so that is going to be good enough for me. But I think if you add an extra plate or two to the height of this, if you can find anywhere else to take that height difference from, it will still be able to turn 360. But then again, at that point, you might as well just keep the round 4x4 brick. Now for the accessories in the front, there is plenty of room to restore these to their former glory, so you don't need to take them down. The only thing I would say is be careful with this tap. If it is pointing up on your model, perhaps pointing it to the left or right will be a little better to save it from falling off down the road. This is probably the first time I'm actually putting away the parts straight from modifying the build. And now for the challenging piece. We've got to sort out the hatch, the helmet, the head of this AT-ST, the very topmost piece. And it does clip out fairly easy, but the actual complicated part is trying to get this lowered and still have the height for our minifigure pilot. For the minifigure pilot, we're not going to remove their helmet and have a bald driver just to fit them in. There is a little bit of space thanks to this. Where did you come from? There is a little bit of space thanks to the gap this hatch has, and we are going to be using that to our advantage. You're definitely not going to be able to fit Chewbacca in here by the time it finishes, but from mocking this setup previously, I can tell you there's definitely enough space in here to get two minifigures, one in front of the other, and that did include Chewbacca. I think I had Chewie and Han in this AT-ST. But we don't want to make too many modifications as to make this just a completely different set, because even from the outside, I think I styled that to look more like Endor. So the first thing I'm going to do is remove enough plates for us to get these two hinges at the back the same height as the black panels, keeping up basically the entire back of this vehicle. So that's the 2x4 with the two corner panels out, and this might be all we need to get this flush with the rest of the build. You know what? We're not far off. We're pretty much there at the back. The problem comes with the front, where it just gets a little too narrow for the rest of the helmet. So for this, we are going to need a drawer of wedges. Well, we're not going to need the entire drawer. Just two of these 2x4 wedges should work to narrow the front into a small point. We're using 2x4s and 2x3 wedges on the sides, so I feel like using the same ones works not only well to match up to those, but we've also got 2x8s on the side, so replacing this with a 2x4 wedge and a 2x4 plate should work really nicely. And all we'll need is another 1x4 on the inside, or we could reuse the 1x3 we've just taken off to secure that down a bit better. Whilst we're working on this hatch, helmet, hood, I've been calling it so many things already this video, I want to try and simplify it a little bit, because the silhouette or the side profile of the Hoth AT-ST does have a little bump at the top, but I feel like the little bump isn't sharper than the whole angle of the helmet. So first off, we're going to be removing these 1x2, I can't remember what these are called, but they're like slope grille elements. And to get this as flat as we can have it, we're also going to be removing all of these dark bluish grey pieces, which some of them might be added back on in different positions later on. We're then going to want to take off the 2x8s, replace them with the wedges and the plates, and really any sort of combination you could like. Don't forget, we do have one of these 2x4s from earlier on you can use again just to reserve some parts in your collection. And when you're putting back on the 1x3 bar elements with the clips, make sure to move them one back so that the handle is still by the open hatch, especially over that gap, but it's also, again, reinforcing that connection between the two plates on the outside. So it turns out the hatch just wasn't fitting down on the AT-ST, which is fine because we've got enough pieces here that we can make something work. But what I'm going to do is rebuild the hatch on the 2x8 being the back of the hatch, which does make quite a bit of sense, at least for how we're building it. Of course, the Lego one makes more sense from a structural plaything. Remember those 2x4s we were adding to the top? If you have them spare, and honestly, this could work in any color, I'd actually recommend taking those and putting them just in the side of the AT-ST's head here, because not only does it work and you really can't tell the difference between the two different wedges, but these 2x6s are going to be much more valuable on top and also on show because they're not too common a piece yet. And if you're like me and want to fill the hole as well, you're just going to need a 2x2 plate in there, though you can't really see it when all the other pieces are back on. It's important to double check that none of the changes we're making are affecting the play features of the model, and so far so good. And now we've got a finished AT-ST at 1/45 minifigure scale, and I think this thing's looking really sleek. We've still got the play feature of the flick fire missiles if I do want to go back and add them for any cool action shots. And I'm not sure if you've got a good look at it against the Master Moldy members monolith to see just that difference in height, but it should be about from blue to yellow. So hopefully I can have a nice comparison up. We've still got the play features of the flick fire missiles if I want to go back and add them at any point. No, I'll probably keep them out of this just for my health and safety. This isn't the only Hoth Empire Strikes Back walker that we are going to be modifying today. Now that we've got the AT-ST to a 1/45 scale, let's see how big the AT-AT is. Though this AT-AT isn't exactly how it comes in the playset, and there's a bit extra snow from when we modified this over Christmas, the rest of it is built fairly similar. There's a few connections that allow easy access to the interior, and also for the snow troopers behind, which aren't only on the inside but are also seated on the doors of the AT-AT, which I think is pretty cool. And of course I've had to keep the speeder bike on the back, and I forgot about that. But as far as the height and size of this thing, it's the same as the play scale, again without the legs. So first off, let's take a height measurement of this AT-AT. We're looking at 25 centimeters, which I'm pretty sure was the same height as the original AT-ST. So I probably was correct about the proportions of this thing. But looking back to Empire Strikes Back specifically, the legs are much longer than the torso. I mean, the torso is calculated from about here to down here, and that's like 2/3 of our model. Not only that, but I know the playset's upper legs are about the same height as the lower legs, which they need to be like double the size. So I think we've got our work mostly cut out for us, but first let's rebuild the original legs. So I've taken a little break just to record a video on some brand new Lego Minecraft movie sets that have come out, both of them. There was a third extra Minecraft set as well, which I did speak about in the same video. Anyway, now that that's done, uploaded and finished, I believe we were modifying the legs. First off, getting them to a reasonable size, and by reasonable size I mean the original size to the AT-AT, and then we can go from there. By the looks of my build compared to the instructions, which I am trying to go back and piece together these legs, these 1x5 brackets that were in the body of the AT-AT, which by the way, I still have all this black trim down here from Halloween, but it's not really doing anything, so we can let it be. These 1x5 pieces are actually part of the set, so I need to take all of these back off the legs and only have the hinge pieces, which do then connect up into the knee, and well, they are the knee. They connect into the thigh of the AT-AT, and that's what we're trying to build. Thankfully, only two pieces, very similar piece to what we just put on the AT-ST, and then another one of these hinge elements, which hopefully I haven't used them all for the AT-ST, but I'm pretty sure they come in enough Star Wars sets. I think there was probably some with ships like the Marauder, and there's probably some on the AT-TE if I really do need to take them, but I should be fine and have all the pieces at my disposal, and then we will need to cover it just like the bottom of the leg here. So it turns out the ones we're using for the AT-AT are actually 2 pins longer than the ones we used for the AT-ST. But there are a ton of these little black pins that go in them, so I'm going to focus for this portion of the video, and we'll come back with some fragile legs just so I don't miss any pins. This wasn't a very smart idea. I have no idea what I was expecting to do with this, but not only have I put on one of the legs backwards, I also have no way to stand this up with only 2 legs installed. And now it's time to raise the AT-AT and try and get it. Looks like it's on stilts, especially with these thin parts connecting the legs. I guess they're still the thighs, not the legs, because they're not got any plating on. But now that we've got the legs of the AT-AT, this thing does still feel freakishly tall, and the fact that we're going to make this even taller, I'm not quite sure the maths even adds up. We've got about, well, it is over 15 centimeters. It's closer to about 16 centimeters, 16, 17 centimeters of torso height for about 20 centimeters. So we definitely need to increase the height of the torso, but we've also got the feet at the bottom, which do take up about 4 of that 20 centimeters. So we do have about 16 to 16. It is a correct ratio. It just doesn't look like it, perhaps because of how thin these legs actually are, especially without the plating. So let's get the plating on now. If I had a pound coin for every time I have broken down and rebuilt these legs, I would have a couple of quid, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it is weird that I keep breaking down and rebuilding the legs of this AT-AT. And just because I know we're going to be putting plates on the sides of these legs, rather than fitting 4, I think it is, of these pins with the stud connectors, I'm only going to do 2 each side. You don't need that many studs, and perhaps for a Lego set, to stop them falling off and make them a little more secure, it makes sense to include more. I mean, we're getting more Lego with the set, but when it comes to making your own custom builds and mock-in sets, these little saves with reducing the pin stud connectors in here can perhaps be used for other parts of the model. There are definitely a few other gaps that are exposed and can be covered up, and that is also the easiest way to increase parts in your collection, rather than, even easier than buying pieces on Bricklink. Just getting rid of those unnecessary pieces that don't need to be in a Lego set and putting them to good use elsewhere. I also say this quite a lot when it comes to building your own creations and starting with official Lego sets. Remember, the Lego instructions are just the start. So if you want to cut a few corners, perhaps you're using these 1x4 and 1x6 tiles elsewhere. You could replace them with plates. You could replace them with 1x2 tiles, which are perhaps easier to pick up off the pick and build station. It's no longer the pick a brick station in Lego stores. And again, by making those little saves of parts here and parts there, these are elements you can be using elsewhere in your Lego mock creations. One side down, one side to go. For instance, I knew that I would have to be building 4 of these, but rather than build all 4 at the same time and really make it feel repetitive when you're trying to build more than you need at the minute, I built 2 of them, put 2 on one side, and now I've gone back to build the other 2 for the other legs. And voila, that wasn't magical enough. Voila, the legs are kind of finished, but you'll notice that I did forget to add the top kneecap, the top joint on the leg. This can go away till May, though I'd love to say that I've done this on purpose. This is just me thinking on my feet. I completely forgot about connecting them because I've got just a simple black 2-way pin where there should be a 2-length grey pin with a 1-length axle on the end. But using what we've learned from the AT-ST with different bars going in 2 pins, we can put one of these 3-length bars all the way through and then connect that to the dish on the other side, which is what I'm going to do to try and get away with pulling the legs off again. It's a very, very easy change if you do want to make it. But when we don't need to make the change, we might as well go with the other option. So I've been measuring up all of these sets to try and get them to the same scale, and the AT-ST is built to 145 scale. So at the minute, I'm pretty sure we've already measured about 35 centimeters. We need to get that to 50 centimeters if we are going to get it to 145 scale. As for the length of it, the length of this AT-AT is about 40 centimeters. That should also be about 45 centimeters, I do believe. They're pretty boxy, these AT-ATs, but there's not too much we can do to extend it without having to break apart the entire interior. So to try and keep that the best we can, we're going to go for mostly the height, but still we want to get the dimensions looking not too weird. So the legs at the minute aren't far off the height of the torso. The torso ends about down here. So that's what we're going to take for the legs. We're at 17 centimeters compared to the torso's 15 centimeters. So the torso definitely needs to be made a little bit taller, especially in this middle region here. This middle region is meant to stick out like a sore thumb compared to the rest of it. And at the sides, it does. It's about a brick wider. But on top, if I grab my ruler just so I can, well, my tape measure, my bendy ruler, you can see it lines up to the angle of the back and the front of the AT-AT. You're going to have to take my word for that one. So it's not actually any taller than it should be. And this is just because LEGO have been using 2x3 and 2x4 plates at the front and back, mainly the front. The 2x3 plates are the problem because we've then got a 3-plate gap where it only raises by 1. So we are going to pull off this roof. It's really handy because I do have some of my snow troopers sat in there, and with their helmets on, they are so close to the top of that ceiling. So we're going to keep these to hand. We just want to take off these 2x8 slope pieces. Again, really, really handy parts to use elsewhere when it comes to model building, and make sure you're not pulling up any other plates from underneath. To replace these, we are going to want 8 of these 2x2 really, really tall bricks, which might be a bit too tall. You can opt for the shorter slopes, which I don't have at the minute. These pieces here, which are just 1 brick shorter than the pieces that I would like to use, and it's purely just for getting the most height out of our build we can. It might look a little too much, and we can always reduce this later on. In fact, why don't I build one side at the higher height and one side at the lower height so we can see the difference? I'm actually having trouble deciding which I like better between the lower side, which you can see mostly from this angle, and the taller side from the other angle. It does look just that little bit too tall, but I remember from playing Battlefront 2 where you can jump on top of the AT-AT at Endor and throw a few shields down, give yourself a little bit of time to heal. You're basically untouchable up there. You could just about jump up the gap on the top of the AT-AT between the lower platform and the top platform. So grabbing our Cassian Andor minifigure, which I have to hand, I do think it would be very hard to jump up the higher platform, and that the lower one seems to make a little bit more sense. And I think for that reason alone, I'm actually going to be using the lower slopes. So we're going to be switching it up onto the lower slopes, and it's a good thing I picked out a few earlier. Not only are these improvements going to make the AT-AT look formidable next to the AT-ST, but also to give more room on the interior. Even if you haven't done the same modifications that I have, you should be able to fit a few more characters. Maybe some more Hoth speeder bikes could go on the inside as well, ready for the ground assault on Hoth. I know it's only a small improvement in the height, but just to update, we are at 36 and a bit centimeters out of the 50 centimeters we need to get. So I do think we are going to have to increase the height of this torso somehow. But again, we've still got the feet to work with, because the feet of the AT-ST are massive with these little thin flaps going out the side, whereas our Lego model here, the little toes are like half the size of the feet. So we definitely need to improve that. That could be a whole like 5 centimeters by itself, because comparing the size of the AT-AT shoe, foot, boot to what crashes down on the T45 Snowspeeder, this thing needs to be thick. And I mean, too thick for Luke Skywalker himself to climb on. Or, in our case, Cassian Andor. I suppose Cassian's also had a fair few run-ins with the AT-AT, so I think we're probably going to go on the minifigure height of Cassian Andor to make up for the size of the boot, and we probably only need to add 1 or 2 bricks to the entire foot. But where do we add the bricks? Because the bottom of the boot is 6x6 and the top is a 4x4 brick. So this is going to need some playing around to find the right pieces. Well, that makes it real easy when I don't get a choice between which pieces I use. I have quite a few 8x8 round bricks. I have enough 4x4 round bricks as well to increase the heights of the legs, and absolutely no 6x6 bricks. But I did find the missing dish for the front right foot. And though these feet are studded together to some extent, there is also an axle which runs the whole way through, and I believe this is only a 4-length red axle. Thankfully at this point I had gone for lunch, because I didn't realize that my mic had completely cut out. Both of my mics at this point were dead. So I let them charge for a bit, and now it's time to finish up the 145 minifigure scale AT-AT. I don't know exactly when the audio cut out, so I'm just going to recap the last couple of things we've done. We've added a 4x4 brick that we actually removed from the AT-ST, different color, but the exact same brick otherwise, onto the bottom of each of the feet, raising it by about an extra centimeter, 9.6 millimeters if you want to be precise. The mic was hopefully working when we added this extra bit to the top, and the next thing we're going to do is take these long bars, which are the exact same pieces we've just added to the legs, and add them again, because I was doing a little bit of Googling and I found the height of an AT-AT walker to actually be around 18 meters rather than 22. The Hoth AT-AT have an extra bit of leg which makes them 4 meters taller, and in turn also makes the legs a little bit longer and taller than the torsos of the AT-AT, which does explain why I tried to keep the torso height and the leg height at about a 1-to-1 ratio, with the legs being on the slightly longer side. But the Hoth AT-AT, when you look at them visually, you can see that bottom joint of a leg is definitely half of whatever's on top of it. So this is just going to be a solid leg that we're going to build straight up between these two joints. No need to add another one, because it would just make the legs more fragile. But we will once again be popping off these legs, and the easiest way we can go about making this work is actually to add this bar in between the joint and the thigh and make a thinner section of leg, just like we see on screens in The Empire Strikes Back. Thanks to me having collected Lego Star Wars sets for quite some time at this point, I should have enough of these beams, bricks with the pinholes and general connectors to mix up some sort of cocktail of pieces to expand the leg exactly how it was built on this top half. So to get you a rough idea at how big this AT-AT is going to be, it's going to be massive. And whilst this is going to look very, very odd, we can angle the joints just like so to position it so that the AT-AT is walking. And I think having the legs like this, so they're longer on top and shorter below, will not only add up to the height, making this a 147 scale AT-AT, which is close enough that we can round to 145, but will also give us not only an idea at how big the UCS AT-AT is, but also how big this machine is compared to its little two-legged friend. So I'm going to try to keep up with all 4 legs, do all of these at once so that I can actually put this down and not have to hold this for the rest of the video. But we'll come back when the legs are all resembling this one here. The AT-AT does look kind of cool with these extra long legs, but I'm not sure if it's looking like something straight out of Empire Strikes Back. Anyway, the measurements don't lie. It is the correct height, might not be the correct, it's almost the correct width as well. So it's definitely needs to be a little bit stretched out lengthways. But now that we've got this AT-AT, I guess we could start putting the kneecaps back. We're definitely going to need to fill out these legs just a little bit more. But to fill out the legs, we're just going to continue that pattern down from the top. We want it to be even thinner, which I'm not entirely sure how we're going to get around working the bars. And with that, it would seem our minifigure scowl 145 AT-AT has been complete. And if in case you were wondering, we can still position the legs like it is walking, and it actually sticks out a little further than the old legs of the AT-AT, which does mean you're probably going to want to stud down the legs of this if you are trying to do similar enhancements yourself. But it does stand up perfectly fine with the legs straight, all facing down. You could even probably spread them out a little bit more than you could on the original set just to get that nice balance. But the reason we were doing this today is to compare what the AT-ST and the AT-AT would look like side by side. And I've got to say that torso definitely should be coming down to at least here. There's a few studs up there, but the size difference between the two is actually insane. This AT-ST is 9 meters tall, so compared to a 22 meter, yes, it's going to be under half, but just to see that in person, this is the reason I build my ships to as close a scale as I can get. And now I really would love to build the UCS AT-AT. So perhaps I'll have to raid my parts and see if I already have some of the parts needed to start building this. But I'm a big fan of this little AT-ST. The modifications we made today really just are the cherry on top of the original build, because even from the back, the head looks so sleek, like we see in Empire Strikes Back, and it does make sense. The head will be a bit more sleeker. We probably could have even got rid of one of these rows of studs, but size-wise, it's as accurate as we can get it, exactly 1/45 scale. So if you'd like to do any of these modifications at home, I definitely recommend, out of all of them, you do the ankles, because it's just so much sleeker with the ankle joint, and then you can position them like I have with one leg in front of the other. But if you haven't already, I'll leave the original modification video on the end screen, and be sure to check out my minifigure scowl discussion video where we talk more about the different scowls, not just 145 and 130, but other popular minifigure like scowls that you can build certain ships to, because not everyone's going to want a massive AT-AT to try and find room to display. So thank you so much for making it to the end of the video. Let me know what you thought about both of these down in the comments. My favorite is the AT-ST. I think it just looks so small, so nimble. And I'd say I'm surprised we don't see the Empire using them more, but we see AT-STs pretty much everywhere. May the bricks be with you always.